Welcome to the Wipro Chief Data and Analytics Officer Council podcast, a series where we discuss topics of interest to CDOs, CAOs, and anyone managing governance or data or bringing value from the data, anyone with an interest in value. I'm your host, James Jeude, and my guest today is Jim Sterne, a leading expert on the intersection of technology and society. He sold business computers to companies that had never owned one in the 1980s. And I can attest from my own experience that that's quite an era when we were replacing typewriters with keyboards. He consulted and keynoted on online marketing in the 1990s, founded an ongoing series of conference and professional association for marketing, and has lately been advising companies on the adoption of generative AI in all of their functions. He also has a wicked sense of humor, and we first met when I began giving away copies of this book to my clients in the 2010s, which sounds like a long time ago, but it has such gems as describing cognitive computing as an attempt to make a machine imitate a human by holding two or more contradictory beliefs at once, which we now call hallucinations. Or another favorite of mine is machine learning, the autonomous hair splitting between good and bad with no grasp of right and wrong. Anyway, today we'll be covering a number of topics, all tying back, though, the needs of CDOs and CAOs and others with leadership roles. So what you're going to be hearing in the next 40 or 50 minutes is profound implications of Gen AI in human life. Jim and I are not going to give you a TED Talk on AI. You've got plenty of channels for that. We're going to assume you know the basics. We're going to discuss the critical role of AI in shaping our future, particularly on human roles inside and outside of tech, with a focus on how that affects people who work with data, like you, my audience. And finally, it always comes back to the skill set, whether we're worried about ourselves, our children and grandchildren, or the people that we employ. We do want to ask ourselves, where is Gen AI going to fundamentally redraw skills in the data space? So with that in mind, let me jump right in, Jim, to letting you introduce yourself, even though I gave you an introduction. And then we'll talk about
nothing else to add.
Okay, that sounds good. What I want to do is start with marketing, because I know that's been a special area, not exclusive, but a special area of yours. There's a number of good podcasts with you discussing the role of marketing. A recent, paper you wrote with Tom Davenport on, marketing can, for example, disambiguate a complex call, dialogue with a customer, right, where they're complaining and praising at the same time. So we know about that, but let's talk about the book you wrote about marketing in 2017. Is that your baby picture back there on the
one behind me?
Yes, exactly.
Artificial Intelligence in Marketing, Practical Applications. Now, I wanted to call it Machine Learning in Marketing, and the publisher said, no, that's not sexy enough. It has to be AI. Said, but it's just machine learning. We don't care. So it was AI. The definition of AI is anything that we don't believe a computer can do yet. And so back then, if you go back to 1985, it was spell check. A computer can't do that. That would be artificially intelligent. So we've reached a point where that book is machine learning. You want to understand supervised, unsupervised, and reinforcement learning, that's where to start, which I believe is where you need to start in order to really understand generative AI. Let me go back to 1995, when I am trying to explain the internet to corporations who understand one-to-one telephone and one-to-many broadcast, but many-to-many, they just actually couldn't comprehend. So I had to explain packet switching. This is how data moves. And so anybody can be a server and anybody can be a recipient. And then it's like, if you understand that, now we can talk about what Web 2.0 is going to be. Oh, people will never buy things on the internet. Yes, they will. Let me explain. So that's where we are today. If you can just kind of get your arms around supervised, unsupervised, and reinforcement and apply it to language, oh, now I see what it's doing.
Yeah, I'm going to dig a lot deeper into this very topic. We're going to spend a good 5 or 10 minutes on it. But let me just note, though, I wonder if The fact that supervised, unsupervised learning, that sort of thing, is that a skill that anyone needs? For example, I grew up in the dark ages where you literally learned machine language so that when a compiler came along, you were so happy that it did the work. We understood that every computer had a different machine language, but they could all use Fortran, COBOL, or whatever was coming up, right? C and C++. Are we going to reach the age where you really can be very good at AI, but literally have no idea the layers and layers and all of, standing on the shoulders of giants that went before? Or do you believe that it's still important to know the fundamentals if somebody really wants to be good at AI? And I don't mean like work at Google, Meta, or AI. I mean good at AI, using it for marketing, using it for operations, using it for, for corporate finance. Do you need this stuff anymore?
When I was 10 years old, sitting on a beach with my father, who grew up in Detroit, Michigan, describing how an automobile works by drawing with a stick in the sand. And,
Yeah.
and when he got to transmission differential, I said, wait, that I don't need to know that. This is go, this is stop, and this is turn. That's all I need. And he was really upset at me. No, you have to understand. If your car conks out and it's in the side of the road, you have to be able to fix it. It's like, no, I have a AAA card. What are you talking about? So the short answer is no. But do I need to understand physics well enough to know that if I'm going 60 miles an hour, it's going to take me a long time to stop? That's important. How the brakes work, not really critical anymore. So do I need to understand machine learning in order to understand generative AI? Today, yes, because generative AI is so different from computing than we are accustomed to. It sure can automate things, and it can speed things up and tabulate and analyze, but it also can create and invent and be an innovation engine. And we don't have language for that yet. We haven't played with that yet. So that's what my TED Talk was about. Like, yes, it can do all this great stuff, but look over here. Do if I understand what machine learning is, I can use generative AI better. Is it absolutely necessary? Yeah, well, it's good to know what your transmission differential does, but
Yeah, I would still agree. I think for the audience I have of the senior people, it's important to at least have a good couple of hours of TED Talk, YouTube videos, and a book that explain to you where it got this, because the fundamental problems of being trained on bad data, on copyright and protection, are you really just a giant plagiarism engine? And if you go to a country that says you can't do that, another country says, sure, no problem. Our audience really needs to know that. I don't have to teach my mom, about that. She's learned how to create poems on Gen AI. But you and I, believe that you really should have that. I think especially at an elevated level like this. But going back to the marketing, when that book came out and AI really began to sort of have its most recent wave of enthusiasm around 2015. And full disclosure, I created an AI practice at my old consulting firm, one of those giant global firms that my readers can pick up on LinkedIn. It was new and exotic, and it had really become accessible just primarily because of hardware advances. I would say, at that point, and the fact that knowledge acquisition was now done for free on the internet, whereas you and I know from back in
big
the
data.
80s, yeah, knowledge acquisition was incredibly expensive. We had great theoreticians. What could we do with grammar if only we knew, that cups sit on tables and tables don't sit on cups? That problem has been solved. But we then, of course, had Gen AI throwing everything off. Like you note, it's actually two-way. It no longer gives us an answer. It gives us an answer and creates things we couldn't even imagine. How did your audience react to that book in 2017? And what do you say differently now? And are you thinking of a revision to that, or would it be an entirely new book? So a couple of questions there. Tell me about the 8-year journey of that book and your audience.
So that it will help to understand my journey, which is in 1993, tripping over the internet and saying, oh, this is the future, and let me explain it to corporations. And by the end of the 90s, I realized that my opinion about your website sucking was interesting, but then I discovered web analytics. We can measure how bad your website is, and we can measure if your changes made improvements, and we can do A/B testing and multivariate testing, and oh, higher level statistics. We can do predictive analytics on customer behavior. Well, predictive analytics writ large with big data and more hardware is machine learning. So that was my path of, hey, we've got server log files there. Let's grep the log file and see if there's a pattern, all the way up to let's pour it all into this unstructured data set and do some unsupervised tell me something I didn't know questions. That's the heart of this book. It is being able to do predictive and saying, if they exhibit this behavior, then we want to give them this email. And that has proven over thousands and thousands of emails to be the best result, to get to the best result. So my audience was, okay, if I have enough data and I have some data scientists and some statisticians, I can make this stuff work. And that remained true up until November of 2022, when OpenAI released ChatGPT 3.5, and everybody went, ooh, look at that.
Yeah, exactly. And I see your point. So the general advice there would be, it's much easier to take something people can currently do in a difficult way and tell them there's a much, much faster, better way. You weren't selling them on the concept of A/B testing. It was the fact that it could be automated at scale, and that sort of thing. And I worked for a search engine in the early 2000s, and we ran an amazing number of tests on fonts, colors, and the like. And it wasn't old school where, like, tonight we're going to make the font dark red and tomorrow we're going to make it blue. It basically went through combinations while we were sleeping. And we had a big enough, with millions of users, you can get a non, what do you call it, statistically reliable set.
Yep.
So with that in mind, it's interesting then that your audience picked up on it and realized it was a matter of what you've always done, only at a much better scale. Or maybe you weren't doing it because the scale cost was so expensive, now became cheaper. Let's take a pivot for a moment and talk about the way in which generative AI is changing marketing today. So what would you say to your same clients? Let's say you've had an 8-year relationship with them, or you see them at a conference for the 8th year in a row. What are you telling them now that's different and new because of Gen AI? And how has that message changed in the last 2.5 years?
It is a completely different animal. It does not require massive amounts of you having data, because the large language models worried about going out collecting all of that data and bringing it in to pre-train the model. Now you can fine tune it. You can put in embeddings with your own vector databases for your own industry jargon. You can build rules and regulations around it. And then you can jump into prompt engineering. And now you can create your own custom GPTs. And now you can create agents. So it's the difficulty is, let me explain what it is, and now how fast can we keep up with the rate of change? So this week, this is what was announced, and can you take advantage of that? My conversations with clients these days are, this is what it can do, and this is what it can do if you're a coder and you can hook together APIs and you're good at if this then that, or using make. If you're a developer, you can do all these things. And if you build your own large language model, well, sky's the limit.
Yeah.
The things that it can do now is moving so fast that within a year, anybody with hands on keyboard will be able to create agents through natural language. Here is a repetitive task that I do all the time. Watch me do it 3 times, and then tell me how you would automate that, and let's have a conversation so that you can automate it for me. And that will be software.
So a lot of that would not be visible to a client, but as we know, the tasks of a marketer are, multitude and engaging with the tools they have, the data they have. So what I'm hearing is a lot of the changes would be doing marketing like we know it now, faster and cheaper, but it wouldn't fundamentally change the marketing.
Part 1, yes.
Yeah, right.
And
that's part 1. And I know there's a part 2. So tell me more.
The issue about part 1 is, where do I start? Well, if I gave you 3 assistants, college interns, to sit at your desk, what tasks would you give them to do? Now, they're not going to be great at it at first, but you're going to teach them. And within a week or two, they're going to be doing stuff for you. That's what agents are about. It is about expediency and data management. And I have this data set of first name, last name, email address. And what I want to do is concatenate those in column D to be first name, last name, email brackets, all in one text field.
Yeah.
Do that for me. And ChatGPT says, yeah, no problem. Like today, that's fine. But I don't have an agent to do that. An agent would say, oh, when the lead comes in, I'll do that automatically and I'll update your Salesforce or your HubSpot or whatever you're using. That's all about expediency.
Yep.
If these things happen, do those things. Over here is the creativity side. In between is personalization. We've got this data about prospects and customers. Here's some ideas. Let's try them out. Let's do testing. Let's personalize the web experience. Let's personalize the emails. Let's personalize the advertising we send them. And then all the way over to let's rethink our corporate strategy. Let's rethink how we're addressing the market. Let's sprinkle some generative AI brainstorming on our product development. There is no end to what's happening over here. This is where we're going to get into these, Precambrian explosion of science and biology and marketing.
Yeah, I got you. So most companies do a pretty manual and therefore infrequent job of tying customer complaints, warranty data, even the most basic items. Behind every warranty claim is a seriously unhappy person that may not show up in your chat, right? They presumably, the product's failed. Tying that back into product design, development, and daily use is fascinating. And in more sophisticated products, actually having local technologies to monitor how often and what time of the day are they pressing the buttons on that smart dryer. How often are they opening the refrigerator? It may have some relevance, to what you do. I don't think we've begun to touch that yet. It still strikes me, Jim, and I'm going to ask you at the end for some examples of where you think AI has really made a difference. Most AI use cases 2.5 years into Gen AI still seem to be better chatbots. Even your paper with Davenport, was I can unpack a complicated chat, more easily. I can tell when the language, is turning, and it's a non-trivial benefit. I still haven't really seen AI and marketing engage themselves at the moment of touch with, the most expensive machinery we have, whether it's our cars and the smart washers and refrigerators. We're effectively signaling a lot of our interest and intent. It hasn't been caught. That I'm looking forward to. I don't know why that hasn't caught on. If it's the creepy factor, the risk that a single, stroke of the pen in the EU could wipe out a third of your market. I don't know what it is, but we haven't gotten there as far as I can see. Now, to pivot a little more, the audience of chief data officers, chief analytics officers, and the senior governance roles, more and more of the marketers I work with are, data driven and data savvy. Back in the 80s, to draw an analogy for us, old folk, it was a sign of honor not to touch a keyboard. Many an executive said, I'm not a secretary. And I once almost ended my career by saying, you're not a chauffeur, but you drive yourself to clients. Probably not a good thing to say. But anyway, the fact is that, you need to know the data. Are we at risk if you're a chief data officer, an analytics officer, a data scientist, that you're no longer needed? Could a marketer who knows how to frame good questions live without the CDO and CAO, or treat them other than a utility? So how would you advise the CDOs in my audience to work with your audience, which is primarily not CDOs, I imagine, but more marketers? How should they proactively reach out, keep their relevance? Any thoughts on that for us?
I'm going to address the CDAIOs, the whole, whether it's analytics, AI, data, information officer, technology officer, all of that will always be necessary. And it is about the difference between strategy and execution. The marketing team is executing. They are getting out the next email. They're figuring out what ad to put on the Super Bowl. They're trying to figure out whether they should spend the money to put their name on the building in order to gain awareness and approval and desire and affinity and da 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 da. But what is happening in the world of data is changing so fast that we need somebody whose sole responsibility is keeping track and advising and saying, we see that you've brought in ChatGPT all on your own against corporate policy, 2 years ago. No,
Yeah.
you can't touch it. We're afraid of it.
Yeah.
We see that you're using it for this, this, and this. We've determined that you can also use it for that, that, and that. However, to really take real advantage of it, we want you to use it on our internal data. And for that, we have a structure, we have governance, we have a process that has to be adhered to because there are security issues and there are IP issues. And keeping track of this moving ball while shouldering change management is the role of the chief fill in the blank officer. How do we do this? So I've written a couple of papers and I've done some LinkedIn learning courses. How do you bring generative AI into the organization? How do you build an AI council? How do you create an AI use policy?
Yeah.
And these things are not the responsibility of the marketing department or the product management department or the accounting department. There has to be somebody who has vision across the board and over the horizon.
Yeah, and a couple of my both my clients and my podcast guests have talked about that council. If it's created by and guided by the CDO, the CAO, the CAIO, that they're the ones who see that need. They don't own it. They can't dictate. It's not a policy distribution mechanism. It's collaborative and consensus, but they make the relevance by calling it, by telling the CEO that we need a council. We should not be deciding this, without a policy. So there's a channel as well, I think, for governance, if you will. You're governing policy rather than governing data in many ways. Yeah.
The data will so the data becomes even more important in a world of generative AI because the generative AI system hallucinates all on its own. If it has bad data to start with, you cannot recover from that. So data governance and data accessibility, usability, explainability all becomes even more crucial.
Yeah, exactly. In the marketing world, we'll hit on that example for just a moment longer. How often are you seeing your clients using Gen AI to create content rather than to read what people are saying, scan the markets, look at competitive news, chat bots, right? We talked about that. How often is it writing the copy, coming up with the slogan? I know it's generating a lot of pictures, so people don't have to worry, ironically, about license fees, given that it's creating it off of plagiarized images. I see that constantly. I would say almost every deck I see now, every presentation, every photo is AI generated because people don't want to bother with common, whatever the common license framework. How about that? Are you seeing generating an idea? Or when people are saying, what are our 5 marketing options? Do we focus on channel A, B, C, or D? Are they using Gen AI to sit at the table and add a voice to that? Should they be?
All of the above, and yes. So writing copy was actually the first use case for marketing. And the proof of this are companies like Writer and Jasper, who created large language models for marketing departments before OpenAI released ChatGPT.
Yeah.
These were generative tools that you could train them on your brand and your voice and your colors, etc., your use cases, and it would generate copy for you. Here is a press release that has been approved by legal. I now need this chunked into a Twitter post, a LinkedIn article, a blog post, and a script for a podcast. And it would generate those things. Now, does it still hallucinate? Yes. Does it do it perfectly? Absolutely not. Everybody knows that any content that comes out of these things has to be deeply reviewed and cleaned up and clarified and humanized because we know AI speak when we see it.
Yeah.
So this generate content for me was the first use case. The next was, oh, we can automate stuff. Ooh, that's cool. Let's apply some of that. And then the third stage is, let's bring it to the table and have that brainstorming conversation where we can bring in, hey, ChatGPT, I want you to look at this individual's blog posts and interviews and emails, and this person, and create a panel. And here is the PowerPoint that I'm going to deliver to them to convince them to buy my product, let me hire more people, invest in a new factory, whatever it is. Here's the PowerPoint I'm going to give them. Here's a video of me giving the PowerPoint. Now, what questions will those personas have for me? And okay, here's a new version where I've answered those questions before they had to ask. What do they say about me after I leave the room? And what vocabulary should I use to convince them individually using neurolinguistic programming so that they feel that I really heard them and understood them?
Yeah.
That kind of brainstorming, that's where I talk about the innovation engine, the area we're not accustomed to computing like that yet.
Yeah, exactly. And that has even been used by political scientists for long periods of time, right? In the 2016 campaign, my understanding was a very simple algorithm looked at the key topics in a given city, and President Trump had used that to create a lot of his talking points as he went from city to city. I'm not making a political comment, but it definitely, then when people say, he or she hears me, they meant it literally because it was echoing back the local language and the local problems.
And that was carried just a little too far by Cambridge Analytica.
Yes, exactly. Although I'm not a big fan of how that worked out, but in many ways I still wonder, did they do anything wrong? But that's a topic for another podcast.
Well, the thing that they did wrong was they did not follow Facebook's use policy.
Right.
Their technology was brilliant, but for the purpose of finding a hot button per individual, and not just this is the hot button, but this is how to present the argument based on your posts on LinkedIn, and then they stretched it too far based on your friends' posts that you did not, you should not have had access to.
Turning that to a better use, I could definitely see that in marketing. For example, if somebody's toying with the idea of buying a new car, they start talking about it. I have a family member who just bought a Subaru WRX, and it's like that's all he talks about in a good way. If you catch that person willing to make that moment, I could see a tailored ad that would be perfect. Knowing the right age mix and, like, say, what your friends are saying.
And it's no longer demographics. It is behavior and comments and what you post online. So I want to sell you this car. Should I focus on its safety? Should I focus on convenience because you can get little children in and out of quickly? Should I focus on performance because you like wearing the driving gloves and going down the Autobahn? Right. And yes, we're getting to that point.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense. So with all of the, we'll pivot here to questions I always like to ask. With what you've seen, I mean, you're at the forefront of telling people to use this technology, and then sort of following after, and I'm sure you follow up in here. What is probably the most interesting AI use case? And this can probably, in your case, be something you engaged with directly or something you read about. That you've seen in the last couple of years since that November, 2022 pivot point. What would you say is the most interesting? Do you have one in mind?
No. Give me a second, because
Sure.
The early 90s were very exciting, talking about the internet with people who understood it, because every conversation was a new business model. Oh, well, if it can do this and this, it could also do that. If you can sell books, you can sell shoes. Oh, you can't sell shoes because people have to try them on. Well, we need a delivery and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Exciting. Same thing today. If it can do this, this, and this. So, when you realize that ChatGPT and Claude can access your Google Drive, it's like, here's all of my company's data in a secure environment. I want to know what the policy is about. I just took 17 vacation days and I found out that I'm pregnant. What's the
yes, right.
maternity leave in light of And the thing that generative AI does is it allows you to not just Google something, but actually ask with context. So it's not, I'm troubleshooting this product, but here's specifically the product problem that I'm having. And it understands the concepts so they can then go and say, well, here's some ideas for you. And it is a conversation. So every time there is a new feature, it's like, oh, well, now we can do this, that, and the other. Um, I get stuck in the well, it can do everything problem. 1979, in a retail store, I'm selling Apple IIe computers. It's really cool. It can do anything. Well, I don't need anything. Give me an example. And
Yeah.
then in the 90s, you should have a website. That's great. What can I do on a website? Anything. Well, I don't want anything. That doesn't help me. It's like, what
Yeah.
can I use generative AI for? Like, use your imagination. And here's a favorite party trick. I do workshops, and this is like, I'm tempted to ask you to cut this piece out because my stock in trade is workshops for companies. The end of every workshop that I give, the statement is, you never need to take another workshop. Because I will hold up my phone and somebody says, well, I have a question. And I hold up the phone and hit record. This is my position. I'm trying to accomplish this. I've got these problems and these people I'm working with. And how do I use AI to help me? And I play that into ChatGPT, and there's your answer.
Yes.
Now, is it a great answer? Yeah. This is a little rabbit hole I would like to chase for a minute.
Yeah. Yeah.
Generative AI is really good if you are a superior subject matter expert. So my favorite analogy, my grandfather makes beautiful heirloom quality cabinetry, and to make a wardrobe, it takes him 3 months. I can do the same thing in 3 weeks because I use power tools. He says, you don't really understand the wood. You don't have a feel for the wood. It's like, yeah, I have a power drill. And it goes through pine in a heartbeat, and it's really hard to get through maple. I understand the wood.
Yeah.
The result is still an heirloom quality piece of furniture. Because I have knowledge, talent, experience. If I don't, then it comes out looking like something from IKEA.
Yeah.
Because I don't know what good is. So subject matter expertise means you know what good is. If I ask, now I got my degree in Shakespeare. So if I ask for, give me a treatise about everything that Hamlet thought about flowers, I'll read it and go 50% of this is just crap. So I'll get rid of that. But the rest is interesting. If I ask for an 18-page treatise on Napoleonic Wars, I'll go, yeah, okay, look, here it is. And I'll turn it in as an assignment. And the professor will go, you get an F because this is stupid. I don't know the difference. So the output is central. And if you have subject matter expertise, you're going to take what it gives you and improve it because you know what good is. So for students who are like, oh, I can have it do my homework. You could, but the process is the purpose. Homework is not designed to help you get the answer. The purpose of homework is to help you figure out how to get an answer. So it's the same. If I'm going to use ChatGPT to do all of my work, that's like going to the gym and having my robot lift weights for me.
Yeah, exactly.
The weight went up, but it didn't do anything for me.
Yeah, or the joke after Deep Blue in the 1997, I think, was, that's great. Computers can play chess for us now, so we have more time to watch TV. Like, yeah, exactly. The goal is not to lift the weight. The goal is to improve. What's interesting, I'm going to pivot slightly, and then we'll get back to some advice on society and changes. With a couple of my podcast guests, we've been talking about going back to the generative adversarial that was all the rage about 5 years ago before ChatGPT came along, which was having computers, play Go with themselves, millions and millions of games while we slept so that they became better than any human could ever even imagine. We've thought about the adversarial side. So instead of writing a paper about Napoleon, it says he was born in 1492, and invented the dessert and then, took over, North Africa or whatever. It's partly true, partly not. you could basically do like a majority count thing, have 3 or 4 generative AIs write an article, and then come back and find out what parts are common and what parts contradict. And I haven't really seen that happen. Do you think, in terms of generating answers and research, is that a viable approach to? Is there a room for somebody to write a meta generative AI where they don't have to worry about the $1 billion investment in servers? They just sit on top and they kick off, Claude and ChatGPT and Gemini and whatever all the names are, and then basically just evaluate whether or not they got a similar answer.
This is happening already
Yeah.
on multiple levels. So the large language models themselves, the foundational models themselves, are building things in. So first example, we discovered about a year and a half ago that if you said, think step by step, take your time, that it got a better answer. So the large language models built that into the pre-training. So it's now a reasoning model, just because they said think step by step. You can build a prompt that says, I would like you to write the following thing or research the following thing or produce the following thing. And I'd like you to look at the result and rate it on a scale of 1 to 10 using these criteria. And if it's below a 9, figure out a way to improve it and then review that output. And if it's below a 9, continue until you had a 9 or a 10 and then tell me the answer. Now, how many rules do you want to put in there? I want you to fact check everything you do against Perplexity or against Wikipedia. I want you to, now we're building rules that are part of the prompt.
Yes, and I'm going to
build a custom GPT that will do that same set of rules every time I hit go.
So like the basic thing of a citation, it simply didn't exist. The famous case from a few years ago where the lawyer got in trouble. You could say, every citation, please tell me the webpage. And I think they've solved that. What they realized was they thought they were writing a novel, and sort of creating something that looks like a citation. But just like nowadays, pictures no longer do 6 fingers on a hand. That was a big giveaway. It didn't really understand what a hand was. Now it does. It understands a hand has 5 fingers, except in certain cases. So that's a possibility as well, I think, is to treat it component by component, rather than taking the average picture of a person, which, has all these fingers moving. It now knows a person has arms, hands, and the like.
Well, a little pushback. It doesn't know, but the model is bigger. It has more examples. So the average is better. It's not a database. It's not a search engine. It is a large language model, and that's it, with some rules and regulations and fine tuning and adjusting. And when you adjust too far in one direction, Google discovered this when they put out their image system. They wanted to be inclusive. And somebody said, well, I want picture of the founding fathers. Well, here's one that's a Native American, and here's one that's female, and here's one that's black. It's like, oh, we went too far. So let's adjust those criteria back a little bit. We're working on that fast and furious. And these models, to quote Ethan Mollick, this is the dumbest AI you will ever use.
Yeah, got you. So with all of that in mind, and given where Gen AI is both enhancing existing tasks, and we could talk about whether it's going to replace tasks or create tasks. Personally, my feeling is there's a lot of optimists out there who say, well, every worker in a factory who's lost 2 robots, somebody designed a robot and somebody fixes it. And if you merely enumerate the class of jobs, it looks like we end up, with a balanced seesaw, right? The number of jobs that are gone, candle makers, and the number of jobs that are created, consultants, match, but the quantities don't match by any means, right? Obviously, you don't need as many robot maintainers as you did factory workers, or you wouldn't have gotten robots. What would you advise a listener who themselves may be looking for a master's, or their children or their grandchildren, at the age you and I are in? Let's say they're really interested in data, really interested in computer science, they're in college, they're just starting out. What would be the path to success? What sort of Classes, what sort of degree do you think they're going to need in the next 30 years?
That there's a whole bunch to unpack there. First of all, AI is really good at tasks. It's not good at jobs. So
Yeah,
your job is figuring out what task to do, to what degree of perfection, how much should you invest time and money in doing the task, and can it be automated? Um, and it was trying to remember which company it was that just put out the memo that said, we're not going to hire anybody unless you can prove that AI can't do it.
mm,
Now, AI can do the task. And if I can have AI do the task for me, then I can do more tasks. So the big broad advice is not everybody's out of a job, but that we can accomplish more things with the same number of people. And we might
right.
discover even more things we want to do, and we might need to hire more people. So rather than, oh, look, this machine replaces that human, it's augmenting that human. So I can do more. So that's level one. What should I study? I started out in sales, and my first sales manager um, had gone halfway through law school and stopped because it just wasn't a good fit for him. And I said, "Oh, did you feel you wasted time?" "Oh, no. It was great. It taught me a different way to think."
Yeah,
And it became extremely useful for me in everything else that I do. So my advice would be to take courses that teach you different ways to think. That means humanities, engineering, programming. It means biology. Become a Renaissance person
yeah,
with an emphasis on the humanities. And that's not just because I had my degree in Shakespeare, but if the machines can do the coding, then yes, the people who bought the first automobiles had to be able to fix their cars.
yes,
And then we had mechanics and network of service stations. Didn't
yeah,
need to do that anymore. So at the moment, in order to get the absolute most out of this stuff, yeah, you got to go in and twiddle some bits and write some APIs and test. I'm not a coder, and I'm using this all the time, every day. The reason I say humanities is that if that machine is going to do the machine stuff, the hard part is dealing with people.
yes, right.
And that's where theater, literature, the music, that's what's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And understanding how humans think. Just wait a second. I'm going to grab one book off my shelf that I think you'll find interesting. My devoted listeners will recognize this from a previous podcast, but I'm sure not everybody has watched everything. A friend of mine and the founder of a human sciences company in Denmark, Christian Madsbrook, wrote a book called Sense Making. And it really is a manifesto for the importance, if not the absolute necessity, of humanities in the age of the algorithm. He wrote this about 8 years ago, and I would say it still hasn't changed. I mean, he's since talked about prompt engineering and the like, but absolutely, I'm an engineering major, but I look back at a lot of the novels I read, the situations people found themselves in. The novelist brings their life experience, where if I find myself in a tough negotiation, I pick up from those. And I'm sure people get that from movies as well. They learn a lot on human interaction. So that's an interesting thought. And of course, data needs to be everybody's job, in my opinion. Data literacy is a whole different topic that we've been talking about in this industry for decades. But I
And
do
data
think,
literacy is the fundamental part of AI literacy.
yes, exactly. I'm going to close with an anecdote some of my listeners have heard, but I have a professor who was a top data science, data mining kind of guy, like the most frequently cited paper ever decades ago. And then he took a pivot and decided to go back literally and create Data 101 at Rutgers University here in New Jersey, the largest state university. He has thousands of students go through this course. And up until November of 2022, he figured it was about 50% asking the right questions and 50% learning some basic tools. How do you discover, that there's a correlation? What's a low p value versus high? Then Gen AI came along. He ran all of his old tests through it. It scored roughly a 95. And he realized he had two choices. One would be to go to great efforts to block them from using technology. Put them in a room, block cell phones. There's legal problems with that. What if their mother dies while they're in the room and all that? Secondly, he realized, and talking it over with me a bit, that these are the skills you would reward an employee for, of taking a tool and doing it faster, cheaper, better. Why would you punish them in college for something that would gain them a promotion later? So he rewrote his questions to be way more complicated and way more subtle. And he now argues that it's 5% knowing how to answer the question and 95% knowing the right question. And the course continues to be relevant. So he basically gave in to Gen AI, just like, when calculators came out, some professors were saying, well, what's the point of teaching, how to do, I don't know, standard deviation if you can just key the numbers in? And now you and I know nobody really has to know how to do standard deviation. We have to know what it means, but we don't have to know how to do it. And that is the important point.
100%. And I'm going to direct you and your listeners to Humanity's Last Exam, which is a benchmark for generative AI systems that is something like 3,000 questions created by world experts that are complicated and subtle and are very difficult to answer.
Yeah, then we do need better benchmarks. Another place where Gen AI needs a lot of work is what's called naive physics. Asking it, what angle does a board, before a marble will roll downhill? Well, you and I know it's got to be very, very shallow. But it does basically friction of glass, friction of wood, doesn't understand, the concept of rolling. So at the moment that it still fails on very naive physics questions.
This is the one of the first things that I say in all of my workshops is do not count on generative AI for questions of fact.
Yes.
Ask for its opinion, and
yes.
You'll get much better answers.
Unless it's something really simple like when did so and so die, and even then you have to be careful. It'll give
you
you
got to double
day.
check.
Yeah, exactly. So my last topic, is there anything I didn't ask you that you wanted me to ask? Anything that you wanted to talk about that didn't come up today? I know that's by definition open-ended.
It is open-ended. Well, I am enthused by the look over here at the innovation side, and I encourage people. My next book. So this book was 2017. Next book coming out in August was co-written with Tom Davenport on what does generative AI do to the world of customer relationships.
Yes.
And it's, can you understand a complaint that comes in and how do you personalize and how do you hyper-personalize and all of that. The book after that I haven't even started yet, is this stuff. How do you think about thinking with a computer? And at the moment, I'm playing with three questions. The big what if. The second one is, well, what about? What if we could do this, but what about that? What are the constraints? And then what if we just turn everything on its head? What if we did it upside down backwards for half the price and half the time on the moon? And these are the kind of questions I refer to them as sophomoric questions, because every university sophomore asks these big questions that as an adult we go, you know what? I don't smoke enough dope to ask those questions anymore.
Yeah.
But you can go back to that childhood wonder of, but what about, or what if we could, or what if we had a tensile strength that was big enough that we could build a building like Frank Gehry did? Like, just invent. And that's, to me, is wildly exciting.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I look forward to seeing you put that in writing. And I think a preview of what you and Davenport have already done was in the HBR when I was, searching in prep for this. So that's directly relevant to tie back to our first topic is there so much more that marketing and customer experience can do to interact at the moment it's needed and not all be after the fact. But Jim, on that note, I think I'd like to thank you again for giving me your time and interest. I'd like to consider having you back in a year or so when you've updated and learned. It's always good to check in, especially given the rapid growth in these areas. And it's now become a nation state level investment and not just a company investment. So we're going to see unbelievable changes in the coming year or two. So let's check in with each other, and thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to turn off the recording and
My pleasure.
say thank you.
Thank you.